maternal love is just as important in childhood as vitamins. And without vitamins, you don't get physical health, and without maternal love, you don't get mental health.
The distinguished child psychiatrist, John Bowlby, has been studying Homo sapiens for over 50 years. Bowlby believes that future happiness for individuals and for society as a whole depends on the relationship between mother and child when they are making the bonds. According to Bowlby, for the first 5 years at least, a child should be cared for consistently by one loving adult, and nature has decreed that the role of caregiver should fall to woman.
Social life and political life, and that what we needed to do was to reconstruct domestic relationships. There have always been two sides of the same coin, really. One side leads to the corporate feminist who gets a seat on the board and becomes the president's advisor on women's affairs, and the other side leads to women trying to invent new ways of living.
One school of feminism really has it that girls ought to have a career just like men. And any getting married, having a husband, having children and so on is so second-rate and unimportant that you just either don't do it at all or don't bother about it. No, I think that's very silly.
A mother who is weeding the fields in Ethiopia is working. It's never considered then that it's inimical to her status as mother. Mind you, it is important, I think, that women are not separated from their infants when they're carryable, and they should do work, in my view, which is compatible with still being with their children. I think they'd want to.
John Bowlby may be surprised to discover some lukewarm support in the feminist camp. At the age of 80, Bowlby is used to controversy. His critics have called his work male chauvinist, right-wing, and just plain wrong. But Bowlby adamantly refuses to be distracted from his professional concern, the mental health of the nation.
10% of the people in this country spend part of their life in a mental hospital before they die. 10%, 1 in 10. Another 20% have major psychiatric problems. They may get by reasonably well and they don't get into a mental hospital, but they are, to a greater or less degree, crippled.
John Bowlby believes that he has identified a major cause of mental instability, a basic human need which is seriously misunderstood by our modern society. He offers his conclusions not as a matter of opinion, but as scientifically established truth.
I'm the girl that makes the thing that drills the hole that holds the string that drives the rod that turns the knob that works the thingamy-bob.
The Second World War accelerated fundamental changes in a society that was already changing. Women were recruited into the workforce in large numbers, and they were there to stay. It was a time of separations. Women from their husbands, children from their fathers, some never to return. The traditional family structure was forced to adapt to altered circumstances, and the processes of change were set to continue into the prosperity of peacetime. Even before the war, John Bowlby had been professionally interested in the psychological effects of separations. He discovered during psychiatric research that many delinquent children shared a common experience in early childhood, a long and enforced separation from their mothers. After the war, Bowlby and his colleagues at the Tavistock Institute in London began a systematic study of separation.
My colleague, James Robertson, was studying what happens to a child when he finds himself in a strange place with strange people. And he's very distressed, and he cries for much longer than people like to believe. And he's very depressed and miserable for much longer than people like to believe. And the curious thing is that when he returns home, not infrequently, he fails to link up with his mother. It appears he doesn't even recognize her. He treats her as a stranger. And this is very wounding to a mother, of course.
James Robertson and his wife, Joyce, produced a series of powerful documentary studies. It was clear that in badly organized separations, children suffered acutely in the short term. But was it possible that these childhood experiences could have long-lasting effects in later life? John Bowlby looked to the animal kingdom for clues and sought the advice of the eminent ethologist, Robert Hind.
John Bowlby was formulating his ideas in the 1950s, and he was coming to the view that a period of separation between mother and child could have long-term effects on the child's development. He had only retrospective data to go on, and it wasn't easy to get other people to accept these ideas. So we thought that if we could produce some experimental data to show that separation had long-term effects, then that would be a great help. And that's why we set up this colony, not with this monkey house, but with an earlier monkey house, deliberately to separate young monkeys from their mothers for a short period to see whether these had long-term deleterious effects. Now, they did have long-term deleterious effects. And they're not experiments that I would want to repeat now because I think they cause quite a lot of suffering to the young monkeys. But at the time, we felt it was justifiable to do these experiments, and we did, in total, about a dozen separations. And these were sufficient to show that under certain conditions of separation, you could pick up the effects of a 6-day separation experience 2 years later.
Well, if the disruption of a bond is so important and has these adverse consequences, what is the nature of the bond that is disrupted? And at that time, the only theory which was about, both in psychological circles and psychoanalytic circles, is children become interested in mothers because they feed them.
An American psychologist, Harry Harlow, had also been experimenting with young monkeys separated from their mothers. Harlow supplied artificial substitute mothers, a wire structure, and a more comforting toweling model.
Harlow, very imaginatively, decided, well, this is an opportunity to study maternal deprivation in rhesus monkeys. And, of course, he found that these little monkeys much preferred the soft dummy to a wire contraption from which they got their food. So he demonstrated that, in monkeys anyway, clinging to a nice, soft, cuddly object is preferred to one that gives food. So that confirmed, you see, that food was really not the center of the stage anymore. He demonstrated that these monkeys that had been brought up without mothers were appallingly bad mothers. They ill-treated their infants. Admittedly, as time went on, the second, third, and fourth infants, you might say, educated them to be better mothers. But they were never awfully good.
Bowlby was also drawn to the work of another psychologist, Konrad Lorenz.
The gist of Lorenz's work was simply this. The young of geese, they are born so that within 24 hours they are capable of running around. Lorenz has done various experiments where, instead of Mother Goose, he was the familiar figure and they followed him. But the point is that a preference develops for keeping proximity to some figure that is familiar. Familiarity is a key point.
If the human infant, like the goslings, quickly learns to rely on a familiar figure, it would not be surprising if the child showed distress when the familiar figure was absent. Mary Ainsworth was a distinguished collaborator of Bowlby. She devised experiments to study the behavior of small children when left by their mothers in complete safety for short periods. The strange situation experiments have been repeated at the University of Minnesota in the United States.
When Mother departs again, episode 6, this time leaving Eva alone, the stress is greatly increased. Eva is clearly upset. Eva's mother can see her on closed-circuit TV from the adjoining room. If either she or the researchers feel that Eva will not settle herself, this period will be cut short, as was done in this case. Instead of the expected mother, the stranger returns in episode 7. Eva's disappointment is obvious. She does not seek to be picked up, and while she accepts contact with the stranger, the contact is not fully effective.
Armed with psychoanalytic case histories, detailed observations of young children in separations, and extensive animal studies, John Bowlby felt able to advance a theory of attachment.
I define attachment in terms of keeping proximity to or accessibility to a preferred figure. And that becomes very evident from about 7 or 8 months. It's synchronized really with the child becoming mobile. The more he can crawl around and run away, the more important it is that there should be a system within himself which keeps him in proximity.
Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution have had a great influence on Bowlby's thinking.
Certainly in days gone by when human beings were living as hunters and gatherers, if any individual was isolated, they were prey to the local predators, wolves or leopards or whatever they were. So keeping proximity is a good insurance policy. That's the key point. And of course, a small child, if he gets lost, he can die of exposure very easily. I mean, he dies of exposure long before he dies of starvation. So attachment behavior is an indispensable part of an animal's behavior, an animal's equipment.
Sigmund Freud played an important role in Bowlby's intellectual development, but attachment theory leads to an estrangement with the Freudian view of humanity.
Okay, you've got sex, you've got food, you've got attachment, and how do these compare? Well, the answer is attachment's more important, because there's plenty of time to engage in sexual activity. There's plenty of time to feed, because, you know, if you go without food for 2 or 3 days, it won't kill you. But if you are isolated, you can die of exposure, and in many circumstances, a small child can meet with an accident or road accident. So, in many ways, attachment behavior it takes priority. I'm always talking about that person who cares for a child. I'm not talking about the natural mother. I'm talking about the person who cares for the child. Now, a huge majority of children, of course, are cared for by their own mothers. I think there's no doubt that children come to prefer that figure. But there are also, in the ordinary happy family, subsidiary figures. There's father, who may be an important extra. Grandmother, maybe a nice lady who comes in to look after the child for part of the day. So all these assistants are, I think, enormously important, but they are not the top. It's a hierarchy with preferences.
Well, now, in one sense, I think everybody should be looking after the infants. They should be a common cause of concern. It should be possible for a child to walk to from one end to another of our cities and be helped on its way by people in the street, instead of the situation we have, which is that we've got to watch our children all the time because something will happen to them. I think that when it comes to the actual skin contact, the physical contact, the breast is the obvious indication of the way that should go. It should be a non-invasive contact, non-exploitative contact, and I think it's probably best left to women.
The attachment between mother and child is absolutely central to human happiness. Damage the attachment, damage the child. Mothers carry a heavy burden of responsibility in Bowlby's world. This is too simple a view for some critics.
I find there's something that's always struck me as very odd, that Bowlby comes from a background of psychoanalysis, which one might feel is a tradition where the sort of variety of human behaviour, of the complexity of human thought and feeling is something that's emphasised. However, I think in attachment theory you get a very simple view of both children and of parents. The social world is really not present in that theory. I mean, you don't get the idea that daily life is a very complicated matter, that mothers have a whole lot of concerns beyond looking after children. They live in a social world that is not only concerned with children, that they live in a culture, that things vary from culture to culture.
At the Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, Martin Richards is studying the relationships between tiny premature babies and their parents.
Yep.
Oh, he's got his eyes open.
And we know from a lot of work that people have done in the immediate days and weeks after birth that these are very important times often in the building of a relationship. But it's not simply the direct relationship between mother and baby that matters. There are a whole number of things about this situation, about what a mother feels like, for example, having given birth to a very small, very sick baby.
Hello, Jamie.
Her feelings have to be dealt with and are part of the situation. It's the social situation of this unit and units like it, the difficulties of visiting. All these things come into the formation of the relationship, and these really are not there at all in attachment theory.
He hasn't been weighed today, hasn't he?
No, he hasn't been weighed.
But
Well, when I gave birth, I was separated from half an hour later. He was gone, you know, and then he went home the street. I felt really depressed, you know, very, very low, because I had all the presents and the cards, but no baby, you know, and everybody else, they'd come walking in here to their babies or have the babies by the bed. So it was really, really hard, you know, very hard.
For Martin Richards, the bonds between mother and child are more subtle and complex than Bowlby's attachment. The relationship begins earlier, and it involves two-way communication, with the baby just as active as the mother.
Okay, Sally, I'll just adjust the camera, make sure I've got you both in here, all right? That's fine. And,
Dr. Lynn
just
Murray
chat to her.
is observing Sally and her 8-week-old baby, Emma.
never sat in a chair like this before, have you? No. No. Oh, do you like it?
In a moment,
This chair.
Sally will be
It's a
asked
funny
to
chair.
freeze, to withdraw from the communication.
Yes.
the response that you saw to the blank face situation too, when Sally froze. First of all, Emma sneered and frowned and looked away. Well, if I hadn't told Sally to keep a still face, probably she would have responded to those signs and become drawn back in to the communication. So I think one thing we can say is that very early on, the communication between mother and baby is very rich and well organised, and that the baby is just as active a partner in the interaction as the mother.
Yes.
For centuries, long separations have been a way of life in the Royal Navy. In a naval hospital at Portsmouth, one of the doctors noticed a possible connection between some of his young patients' ailments and their father's duties at sea. He approached Martin Richards, and Cambridge University is now investigating.
I think the point about situations like the periodic absence of men in the Navy, or indeed in many other occupations, the point it really makes is that we don't think that much about fathers. We take it for granted that it's reasonable to expect men who are married, who have children, to work under some regime whereby they may be going away for many months at a time. And I think in that way it shows something of what we feel about fathers as a society and the way we place them as against mothers in family life.
She was uncontrollable. She didn't know where he was. She didn't want me at all. She wanted her dad. And that was it. We had to give her some medicine to calm her down. because she was just getting uncontrollable. She's starting to settle down now, and he's been home 3 years. And it's sometimes she'll give him a kiss, sometimes she won't. But if he's not there for a day, then she'll start asking again, and it takes her about a week to get over that day. Because he was there for her in the first part of her life, and she relied on him, and because he deserted her. But where it was different in the youngest one, he wasn't there, so she didn't know who the daddy was.
One can certainly see that there might be changes in society which would make it, as it did in, I think, in the post-war years, people would have that rather cosy domestic notion of mother and child at home as a very attractive one. And if that happened, I can see that attachment ideas would become perhaps more influential again. But hopefully we are moving to a view where you see parents and children within a context, within a society. And as long as that's kept going, it seems to me that people will want to modify Bowlby's work. They'll want to generalise or to look more broadly at the social world and not stick rather narrowly to this one relationship.
To be a mother is to have no claim on anyone. You've got no claim on your children's loyalty. You've got no claim on the state, not really. I mean, you have a piffling allowance. But on the other hand, your name will be invoked whenever there's a difficulty. One of the most important stages in treating any problem that arises appears to be recognizing your hostility to your mother. And when you do that, you're supposed to be well on the road to recovery. And I've seen cases where I've thought it was really inserted in the case diagnosis, this idea that the mother was the cause of the problem. Once you've succeeded in blaming mother, you're going to get better. I regard this as pernicious myself.
It's not my idea. I mean, I didn't invent attachment, but I think it's a part of the nature of man, and we are wise. We are wise, I think, to live our lives according to our natures rather than to fight them. So, I mean, you might say I'm a nice, ready target for people who don't like human nature.
If nature designed human beings to rear their young, as Bowlby says, then most of Western society is at odds with nature. While their mothers are at work in the city, these youngsters are in the care of fully trained professionals at the Kingsway Children's Centre in London.
I think people should be given a choice into how they run their lives. I think, unfortunately, people don't have a choice nowadays. Often most people have to work. And so if they're put into that financial position, or they're told to get on their bike, get to another part of the country, support themselves, then I think they should be given the resources to look after their families in whichever way they think is appropriate.
I think there is good evidence that with good nursery care and a home environment, children grow up perfectly well and in fact may well have advantages through the social relationships they can form in the nursery. Similarly for the lives of women, I don't think women should spend their adult lives only involved in childcare. I think it's bad for them and in fact bad for children.
The ill effects on children are not intended. They're what I call a fallout. They're a social fallout of economic success. And we have to consider, well, is the price we're paying too much?
In the remaining programs in this series, we will be looking at British and American society to see if there is evidence to support John Bowlby's theory. If your child goes into hospital, could he emerge a psychological cripple? Are the delinquents and child prostitutes of New York the direct consequence of bad mothering and the breakdown of family life? When we punish delinquent mothers by jailing them, should we jail their children as well? Or sentence them to a life without mother? What can we do to help the youngsters who have already been damaged by neglect or abuse? And what about the ordinary parent? Do we expose our children to psychological dangers when we ask others to care for them? We will be looking for answers when we ask, are mothers really necessary?
Showing children my little child.
When a sick child is admitted to hospital, the wrench from home and family, particularly from mother, can have serious consequences for the child's psychological well-being. There is a danger that the treatment of physical illness can jeopardize mental health by breaking the bond. Nowadays, the wards of many children's hospitals are crowded with family and friends. Even the family pet occasionally gains admission here at the Royal Hospital for Sick Children in Bristol. Not so long ago, it was a different story. David Baum is the Professor of Child Health at the University of Bristol. Professor Baum has vivid childhood memories of his own admission to hospital.
I was taken by my parents to our local casualty department, at which I was a frequent attender, and felt this was going to be one of the regular visits, and without any preparation found myself on a trolley going down a dark corridor with my parents disappearing into the background. And thereafter I was a stranger in a strange world. I was in a bed, visited formally by a medical nursing team, additionally by nurses for painful intramuscular injections, and for several days I was out of my normal world, very frightened of the pain and the isolation.
While the young David Baum was getting first-hand experience of a children's hospital, a research worker was beginning a project on the psychological effects of separating children from their mothers.
Doctors and nurses in 1948 were just as committed to their professions as doctors and nurses are today, but the hospital professions were then held by a myth that had sustained the hospital professions for several generations, and the myth was that hospital wards were happy places.
James Robertson and his wife, Joyce, began a crusade to change hospital practice, but their warnings fell on deaf ears. So James decided that if the medical profession would not listen, he would make them watch. He bought a cine camera and a book on how to use it, and went into the wards to film a child.
This is Laura in her garden at home. She is a first child, and so far an only one. Laura's parents, like many others, expect their first child to be rather more grown up than she should be, and she has responded to this with the behavior of an older child. They are pleased that she's a bright child and advanced for her age. They say with a certain pride, it takes a lot to make Laura cry. Laura was very lively in the bus which brought them to the hospital. It is doubtful whether she realizes her mother is going to leave her there. When the nurse says, "Come and see the rocking horse," Laura says, "You come too, Mummy," but goes quite cheerfully without her. She played a few minutes with the rocking horse until the nurse took her away. She is not quite so sure of herself now. It's a little while since she left her mother somewhere behind these big glass walls. She resists entering the strange bathroom, and at this moment, just as her face is hidden, she bursts into tears and cries, "I want my mummy. Mummy. I want my mummy." When her mother comes in, Laura begins sobbing. Her mother has a good understanding of the child and has kept back for the moment of parting the thing which will console her most, an old piece of blanket Laura has had since infancy and which she calls her baby, the only things in this strange environment which make a link with home. What do these strange happenings mean to her? Laura hadn't fully recovered from the anesthetic when her parents arrived. Laura cannot go to her mother because of the stitches, and the nurse has to restrain her. "I want to get up. I want to go home." Since they may not pick her up to comfort her, they talk soothingly and try to reason with her. She'll come home soon, Meanwhile, she should be a good girl and not cry. Don't go, Daddy. She has been very subdued all morning. Seeing this little girl sitting by herself, quietly clutching her teddy and her baby, it is easy to believe that she has settled in. She does not cry or demand attention. This is the picture seen by the busy ward staff. But see what happens when the nurse comes at playtime. Today it takes longer to make contact, and although the nurse tries hard to cheer her up with toys, Laura doesn't respond. Soon her feelings appear. No, don't. Then she says, I want my mummy.
The premiere showing was in the Royal Society of Medicine in London before a large gathering of paediatricians and nurses, and it felt like a bomb in the hospital professions, because it showed a child of a kind that they themselves didn't allow themselves to see in the children's ward. And the majority of paediatricians and nurses in that large gathering rejected my presentation. They rose with hostility. What I was showing, they said, wasn't true. I was showing an atypical child in an atypical ward, and it was a slander on paediatrics, and the film should be banned. That was the general reaction initially, with a great deal of hostility against me personally for having, as they felt, slandered the professions. And there was a considerable demand that the film should be banned.
But James Robertson would not be silenced. He produced another film, Going to Hospital with Mother.
This is Sally's cubicle, where she and Mother will stay for the next few days. A locker, a cot for Sally, a bed for Mother, and a wash basin. The house surgeon comes to make a preliminary examination. Sally doesn't like this any more than having her face washed.
Facilities for mothers in hospital were extremely rare in the 1950s, but eventually the Robertsons' dogged determination was rewarded, and the medical establishment began to pay attention to their essential message.
Mother is still there.
This little boy, John, was the subject of the Robertsons' most powerful and eloquent study of maternal separation.
Yes, let me say first of all that the making of the John film was a very, very distressing experience for us. We couldn't intervene any more than Joyce giving an occasional cuddle to the child. We couldn't take him over, otherwise we'd have been thrown out of the institution.
John is 17 months old. He will soon go to a residential nursery while his mother is in hospital to have a second baby. He and his mother have a quiet and harmonious relationship. Suddenly, John is in a strange world. John is puzzled and scans the unfamiliar face of Nurse Mary, but he accepts her attention. It is another nurse who feeds him, but he takes the food she offers. This is the fourth nurse to handle John. John has been responsive to each of the nurses who dealt with him on this first day. Any one of them could have built a relationship on these tentative beginnings. On the third day, new nurses are on duty, and John shyly makes advances to them. But the cues he offers are not understood. These nurses, too, fail to mother him. He turns increasingly to the big teddy bears for comfort. He tries again to get attention, but without success. As the days go by, John is increasingly distressed. His unhappiness and attacks by the other children go unnoticed in the hubbub of nursery life. He gets some comfort from whoever is available. But his need of a warm and responsive mother substitute is not being met. On the 9th day, John was in tears from the moment he awoke. This is the last day of the separation from his mother, made more severe because no one took her place. The first sign of the effect on their relationship will be how John responds when he first sees his mother. When John saw his mother, he began to cry loudly and throw himself about in an uncontrolled way. He looked at his mother, but quickly turned away. After a few moments' quiet, he screamed and struggled away from her. I spoke soothingly about his mother and about going home. For the mother, this was a painful experience. She could see how much John needed her, and she wanted to comfort him as she had always done. But he wouldn't have her near him. After a struggle, he cuddled into her. Father came a few minutes later. Again, John pressed away from his mother. For the first time, John looked directly at his mother. It was a look she had never seen before.
Well, I think one has to be pretty careful how one looks into the future and says, you know, when you see him at age 6, say, yes, he's doing that, that's because something or other happened when he was 2. But nevertheless, I think what we could see with John, and I think one could see with probably all children separated, if they become overwhelmed, as John was by the experience, and that would be hospitalized children too, that providing nothing else happens in the next few years, you might get them through. You know, they're never separated again, that they don't become ill and have to go away, that the mother isn't taken ill and goes away and leaves. You know, nothing untoward happens. The experience probably is gradually assimilated. But life isn't kind, and things do happen. And, you know, they do have other experiences which upset them. And if the child has been so upset, as we think John was by this experience, then they carry with them a kind of nub of anxiety, probably. I mean, John was anxious for months afterwards. Wouldn't sleep unless he had a light on, and couldn't go out of the house unless he was sure his mother was going to stay where she was. If he came in, he would be very upset if he couldn't find her straight away. And I think you find this kind of vulnerability, this, we often call it, you know, a nub of anxiety that can be touched off by other experiences.
Yes, I know the Robertsons' films very well, and I think the point that they were making was absolutely correct. I think it was strikingly correct at that time because they were so much ahead of their time. I think if they were making their same statements today, because a lot of their predictions and their philosophies have to some extent be fulfilled, that they would have less of a point to make. But there would still be a point to make. I think we have yet mileage to go.
Working with and alongside the Robertsons at the Tavistock Institute in London was the influential and controversial child psychiatrist John Bowlby. At the age of 80, Bowlby is still teaching the same message. Separate a child from his mother, and the consequences for his future mental health may be catastrophic.
Yes, well, I'm often accused of exaggerating, and various people point out that not every child who has these sorts of experience comes to grief. So, and I mean, the various people have been explaining that this child had a terrible time and it's all documented, and now look at him, he's not too bad at all. Well, my answers to these points is these. First of all, maybe he'll be vulnerable if things go wrong in his life. So long as they're all right, he's all right. But if he'll take setbacks much worse, one point. Another point is this. Supposing it's true that some children, having had some pretty ghastly experiences, nonetheless develop favorably. I say, so what? Thank God this child has developed favorably, but many others haven't. For instance, what percentage of people who contract polio are left with long-term paralysis? And the answer is less than 1%. The fact is 99% get by. Well, now, in the case of severe maternal deprivation, first of all, I think that many more than 1% suffer. I think the percentage is way up in the 20s or 30s. And the other thing is that crippling of personality is much more serious than crippling of physique.
Our understanding is that the long-term effects on the psychological development of the child and the family are very profound if these things are not handled correctly. But it is very difficult work to do. You can imagine it's rather more nebulous. It's how people feel, how they behave. And the information we have is that the effects are very long-term. So the experiment has to be very long indeed. But I don't think that there is currently any doubt in the minds of children's physicians, psychiatrists and psychologists that this is a real business and it is not some trivial or sentimental aspect of the care of children in hospital.
My son was brought in last night, and because he worries when I'm not with him, the facilities here make it much easier for him as well as myself. Being at home, I would have worried sick. I'd have been on the phone every 5 minutes. So really, the facilities are absolutely grand, both for him and for me.
Our most precious commodity in running a children's service in hospital and in the community is our staffing. It's nice to have good buildings and modern equipment, but our most precious commodity is highly trained staff. For the child who has to be in hospital and whose parents may, for very good reasons, not be available, social disruption, traveling distances, other commitments, then I think the next best thing for a child in hospital is at least to know who their friends are on the ward, to have a studious plan that they are not exposed to a very wide variety of different members of staff. If they can have one nurse who is their special friend, and who is largely their nurse during the daytime hours. It can never be just one nurse around the clock like a parent, because there are shifts to be coped with. But if the effort is made, and our nursing colleagues make a great effort to do this, then the number of different nurses is reduced to a minimum, and the number of different doctors is reduced to a minimum, so individual doctors are assigned that is your patient, make them your friend.
Local authorities' social service departments who have moved away from institutional care now use foster care for healthy children out of the family, because they now recognise, partly from our work, that institutional care is damaging to young children and that foster care is the one way of giving them continuity of mothering type care. But sadly, hospitals still continue in giving institutional type care to unaccompanied children of the kind that social service departments have given up for healthy children. So this is my present concern, that hospital wards need to import foster mothers. It's resisted quite a lot, but it's required.
This is what we call a day bed unit, and it is geared specifically to children with malignant disease, that is cancer or leukemia of some form. And the idea of it, basically, is to try to enable us to minimize the amount of time that the children spend in hospital. Clearly, with serious life-threatening diseases, there may well be quite a prolonged period of time at the beginning before you have control of the disease, when the child needs to be in hospital. Nowadays, the majority of children with cancer are cured of their disease. And so, right from the outset, for the great majority of children, the whole emphasis is to return them to as normal a life as possible, and equally important, to make sure that their normal growth and development, not just physical, but mental, spiritual, emotional, should continue and should not be interfered with more than absolutely necessary by the disease and by the often very stringent treatment that they have to go through. So the concept of this daybed area is to design treatment programs such that the child can come up, have treatment during the day, but go home to their own home in the evening if they live close enough. And if they don't live close enough, to go to the Click Hostel to stay with their parents out of the hospital environment, so that they only actually come into the hospital for whatever part of the treatment they require.
Click is a charity working on behalf of the victims of cancer and leukemia in children. The Click Hostel is home from home for many families at a time of deepest anxiety.
It's just impossible to conceive of the situation without this facility. I just don't know how parents cope in other localities in the country where this facility isn't available. It must just make the whole thing 100 times worse. And all we can say is, thank goodness we're in an area where Click is available. As you can see, we have fantastic facilities here, and we're able to go down to a very well-appointed kitchen and make breakfast.
Better than we've even got at home with the microwave cooker, which is a great help because it means that we can do things quickly. And in the bedroom, we've got our own television, so that if we want to be quiet and not, because there are some occasions when you don't want to talk to other people, and we can then come up here and they've thought of everything, and there's an o'clock alarm radio provided, so that when we first came here, I was having to take sleeping tablets in order to get to sleep at night, to switch off, and I was worried about waking up in the morning, but every little detail really has been thought up.
To explain to you how much it feels like home, Hannah, who is in hospital at the moment, very ill, some of the things she says is, I'd like to go out to Click Hostel or Click House. And so she, although she's very ill, has a sense that it is a sort of home to her.
Because we would sleep anywhere. We would sleep in a corridor if we had to, but because we can come back here with a real homely atmosphere, it does definitely make the whole tragic situation that much easier to cope with.
Throughout the long ordeal of Hannah's illness, the Gillard family has found strength in being together at a time of crisis.
Well, I think the thing is that we've got unlimited visiting possibilities. We can be here at any time, day or night, which means that Hannah has our support as well as the support of the professionals in the hospital. Add to the fact that we have the availability of Click Hostel, which is only 5-10 minutes walk away, where we can stay completely free of charge and be close to Hannah at a time when she needs us.
Sadly, sometime after making this film, Hannah died. Hamish Cooper and his sister Tabitha. For 2 years, this little boy fought a courageous battle with cancer.
The night that he died, when I knew that that was probably his last night, when it was clear that the levels of pain control were becoming less effective, there was a point in the small hours of the morning where he said to me, "Mama, I don't want so much pain." And I said, "Would you like me to take away the pain?" And he said, "Yes, please." And so I did give him a large dose of morphine, which certainly helped him die peacefully and in no pain.
Do you want to stop?
Alistair was beside me. We were all together. And Hamish was very brave.
Antonia and Alistair Cooper lost their little boy in 1981. Tabitha was only 5 when her brother died. According to the child psychiatrist, John Bowlby, an understanding of the attachments that bind a family together will help us to make sense of loss.
The days that followed his death were obviously sort of zombie-like. Except you must remember that I'd had 18 months to get used to that occasion. And one of the things we'd actually done even before his death, we'd even organised where he would be buried, because we knew that after his death it would be less easy to make that sort of decision. So those days went by with relatively few decisions to have to make because they'd all been done. And friends and acquaintances obviously came, or wrote, or phoned in large numbers. And people offered wonderful support. And then the weeks went by, and those people began to peel away, so that gradually we realized that they were getting on with their lives, and we felt we were getting deeper into some big black hole without Hamish.
Personally and professionally, family life is of great importance to John Bowlby. His own family, 4 children and 7 grandchildren, all live quite close to him in Hampstead. As a psychiatrist, Bowlby believes that stable family relationships are essential if individuals are to enjoy good mental health. He has been researching and writing about families for over 50 years. In his book on attachment, Bowlby investigates the infant's first and most important relationship. Without constant maternal love, a child will not develop securely. In the volume on separation, Bowlby examines the effects of a mother's absence, primitive responses of anxiety and anger, reflecting the child's overwhelming need to feel secure in a dangerous world. In the volume on loss, Bowlby explores the sadness and depression that are experienced when death makes separation permanent.
When a grown-up has lost someone, first of all, they are numb. They can't really register that anything frightful's happened. And then sooner or later, it hits them. And this is a very painful moment, of course. But there is a constant disbelief that it didn't really happen. And there's an oscillation, you see, between knowing it has happened and hoping and believing that it hasn't happened. And you might say these are quite contrary beliefs, but yet they're both held. A person first one way, first, and then the other. And it's only by talking about it and confirming, yes, it did happen, and where do we go from here, and all the implications, and so forth, and so forth, and so forth, that a grown-up gets over these, begins to get over these things. Well, now, I think the same is true of children. You see, many problems arise because children are not told, or they're not told the truth, or they're told the truth in a very inadequate way. And they don't have the chance of talking about it and challenging, how did it happen, why did it happen? It's very wrong that it should have happened. And protesting, you see, and so forth. Well, now, if children are given that opportunity to discuss it, especially within their own families with a surviving parent, they could go through all the same phases and they can get over it as an adult can, if they're allowed to go through all these phases. But you see, there's such a tendency to abort mourning in children. Either not to tell them or to tell them something or other and imply that, well, this is something that we needn't really worry about and so forth. And this is quite fatal.
Every Thursday at the St. Christopher's Hospice in South London, patients and their families can meet with the staff to enjoy a drink. Facing up to death and its consequences is the business of the hospice movement. The world's leading authority on bereavement is the psychiatrist Colin Murray Parks.
Certainly working in a psychiatric setting, one's constantly driven back to looking for what went wrong in those patterns of attachment in early childhood. And it's perhaps not really surprising that the ways in which people feel about their parents colour the way they feel about other people of the same sex, about the people they love later in life, and affect not only their relationship with that person, but the way they react when that person dies. So that people who've been perhaps sensitized to loss by losses that have occurred early in life, maybe a parent has died or they've been separated for great lengths of time, and you get effects on the developing personality, so that people may either become very clinging, very inclined to overreact following quite minor separations, or they may even go to the opposite extreme of being afraid to make relationships, being turned in on themselves, withdrawn. In a sense, the only way to avoid grief is not to fall in love. And there's a sense in which some people who've been hurt by losses early in life may become afraid to fall in love, afraid of reaching out to other people. And this too may colour the relationships that they do make, so that they become afraid to touch, afraid to get close. And this itself produces complications in marriage and affects the way their whole life pursues its course and the way they react to subsequent losses.
This preschool nursery meets every day in the St. Christopher's Hospice. It's an amenity that the local community finds useful, and it helps the hospice staff. While they're busy in the wards, their children are in safe hands. A hospital for the terminally ill rings to the cheerful sound of children at play. Mingling the generations was a very deliberate policy when the hospice movement was born.
As far as I know, I only met John Bowlby once in my life, and this was because I'd written to Dr. Murray Parks to say we were starting a hospice and that we wanted to look at the families as a whole. We wanted to have some understanding of problems of bereavement. And he invited me to lunch to meet him and John Bowlby. And in the course of lunch, we were talking about the numbers of my patients then at St. Joseph's Hospice who were able to face the truth of the fact that they were going to die. And I remember using the word saying, well, so often they say the hospice is a safe place. And Colin Parks said, but how can you say safe when death is the most unsafe thing that can happen? And John Bowlby said, but I think you're using the wrong word. I think it really should be secure. He said, a child separated from its mother may be perfectly safe, but it feels very insecure. A child in its mother's arms in an air raid may be very unsafe indeed, but it feels quite secure. And I took from that we were trying to make a place which would be secure enough for people to face that sort of unsafety.
Sigmund Freud has a lot to answer for here. I mean, he was right to draw attention to the importance of early attachments, but it was unfortunate that he laid so much emphasis on the sexual component in attachment that he somehow failed to understand the way in which attachments are to do not so much with achievement of sexual gratification and orgasm, but achievement of security, and that the closeness between people owes as much to our need to protect each other in a dangerous world as it does to the need to beget children and have a sexual contact. And I think it was this overemphasis on sexuality which led to a lot of misunderstandings about what went on between mother and child during the early stages. And I think it's largely thanks to John Bowlby and others of that ilk who've studied early mother-child relationships in detail that we're only now beginning to get that clear.
When a patient is admitted to St. Christopher's, it is the job of social workers to help the dying and their relatives prepare for the inevitable in counselling sessions like this.
Robert.
Compiling a family tree helps to reveal the strengths and weaknesses of family attachments.
Called after his granddad. Well, it's very important to put him in. He may have died, but he's your child, and you were right. Perhaps because he is so important, and I guess often gets forgotten and left out by other people, we could return to talking about him a little bit later on. What about parents? I think grandparents are ever so important. They often spoil children, don't they? But you were saying, Helen, that your mother died of cancer.
Yeah.
Yes. What was that like? Can you tell me anything about it, the memories that come back?
Awful. She died in an awful lot of pain.
Did she?
And that's really all that I remember about it, the fact that she suffered a lot. And I don't want that to happen with Bill.
Can I just say now that we shall do all we can to treat every little symptom of Bill's that comes up. And Bill, even when one is ill, one can still be strong for one's son, and we need to bring Michael into it as much as we can. And of course the children have a very important place here. Nothing escapes children. It isn't the words that are said, it's how they watch, isn't it? And so they need to be drawn into it too. And perhaps you'd like to bring them back with you when we could meet again and talk a little bit about their fears and some of their fantasies, perhaps, about what's really happening.
I'd like that. I found in the past that whenever something gets published or someone appears on television talking about bereavement, half the correspondence seems to be from people who've suffered bereavements by divorce. And they always want to say, you know, it was just like that when my husband left me or my wife left me. There's no doubt that loss of a partner following a separation or divorce is a very painful kind of a grief. I think there are differences. When somebody you love dies, the tendency is, if anything, to idealize them. You remember the good things and you forget the bad things. I think following a divorce, you often do the opposite. It's almost as if you need to persuade yourself that the person who's left you wasn't really worth all that much. And people tend, if anything, to denigrate the memory of the person who has they've become separated from.
I mean, all this divorce is certainly against the interests of stable and happy families. I do use the word happy. I use it rather a lot, because the question is, Are people happy or not? To some extent, you see, family life is an investment. I've often made this point. Now, having children is hard work, but I would say that it pays off in the second half of your life, because you've got a built-in social circle. People who haven't got that sort of family life, when the older they get, the more isolated they get, the more lonely they get, and the more depressed they get.
In our society, traditional family life has been eroded. Divorce brings grief to many homes and to many thousands of children. In this fractured society, the gulfs between the generations appear to have widened. Many old people find the modern world increasingly hostile. The provision of institutional care for the elderly has become a growth industry. All the generations rarely live together nowadays, and as a consequence, we have become distanced from death. At the Helen House Hospice for Children, Mother Frances Dominica and her staff are with parents and children while they spend their last hours together.
A place like this would not be necessary if we lived in a different kind of society. Our experience has shown us that society tends to estrange people who are suffering this particular kind of grief, the loss of a child and the bereavement that follows the death of the child. And all we're doing is offering a very ordinary kind of friendship to people suffering an extraordinary kind of grief. There was one very beautiful autumn day, and a little boy of 10 months died here. And when he died, his mother carried him out into a quiet corner of the garden and simply sat holding him for a couple of hours in the garden, talking to him and crying. Mostly one of us was with her. Sometimes we let her be on her own with him for a while. And she sat remembering the time when he was born, also a very beautiful day. And then, when she was ready, she carried him back into their room and lay down with him on the bed. And she fell asleep for an hour, holding him. And then when she woke, she was ready to wash him and dress him with infinite care and tenderness in little clothes that she'd chosen specially for the occasion. And then she carried him to the small room where we have a cot ready. And she laid him in the cot. And over the next 2 or 3 days, she and the child's father went frequently to the room to be with him, to cry, to talk, gradually to come to terms as far as they were able with what had happened. And sometimes she'd lift him out of the cot again and hold him and uncurl his little fingers and look again and kiss him and just be lost in the wonder and the grief of it all. And I know that those days were very important to them. They knew that time was running out and soon he would be buried and they wouldn't see his body again. And they wanted to make the very most of the hours and the days that were left. That small room is very important, not just for the parents, but for brothers and sisters too. And of course, children are all individuals and they all react in different ways, but I'm quite sure that it's very important for them to be involved.
The decision came to ask Tabitha how she felt about the funeral, and she wanted to go. She also wanted to see the coffin before Hamish was put into it, so I took her along to another bedroom where it was, lying on a bed, and she inspected it and saw that it was just a box of wood, but lined like a little bed. And we talked about it, and I answered her questions. And the day of the funeral, she was completely normal in every respect. Some people might say that They thought she was a little extra jumpy. But she was just a child, and she was coping in her way with a very important day. And we feel very sure that that was the right decision to make. But I know we were perhaps harshly judged by some for doing that. At the time Hamish died, I was heavily pregnant with our third child. One of my greatest fears during his last few weeks was of producing one baby on the very same day that I should lose another child. But our third child, Cassandra, was born in February 1982, only missing Hamish's birthday by 2 days, which was another thing that we found quite difficult. And because I had always been a coping person, I continued to put on my face in the morning. I continued to go to the supermarket and go through the shopping list. And even those very close to me never really began to feel what was thrashing around inside me was an absolute longing just to go to pieces, just to dig a big hole and to go into it and to see nobody and do absolutely nothing, and to scream and to wail and to beat my chest and to say, "Where is my son?"
One of the reasons that people find it difficult to grieve is that they're afraid of breaking down. Many people fear that if they don't control their feelings, they will literally go mad, they'll have a breakdown. The truth of the matter is, from a psychiatric point of view, they're much more likely to have psychiatric problems, in a sense, to break down, than the people who express their grief freely from the start and, in a sense, get on with what Freud called the grief work, because grief is a job of work that needs to be done. Men in our society particularly prone to feel very ashamed of themselves if they get upset following a loss. And it doesn't feel to them that they're being manly if they start crying and showing their feelings. So there are very strong social pressures on people to suppress and inhibit grief. These compete with the internal pressures to do the opposite. The natural thing to do when you suffer a loss is to cry aloud and to stop everything else you're doing and get on with the business of searching for the person who's gone. But the intelligent human adult knows that that is A, a waste of time because you're not going to find them, and B, it's not respectable. It's not something that is regarded as good form in our society. So we're placed in a conflict. And in the early stages of grief, I think everybody resolves that conflict in their own particular way. Some people feel more free than others to express their feelings.
Well, when you're with any family who is losing or has lost a child, there's a bit in you which, not so much unfair as just this big question, why? You know, why? We don't understand. And when you're with families who are losing 2, 3, maybe 4 children of the same or different diseases, then it's just too big for my understanding anyway. And I don't have the answers, and I can't pretend I do. I think one of the most harmful things people can do is trip off pious platitudes, you know. It's hurtful. So many of the things that we say in an attempt to make it make sense just make the wound go deeper, I believe. I don't know of a reason. All I can do is try in my own way to stay alongside. I can't take the pain away, but perhaps in a very small way I can share it.